Or we are starting the webinar.
Okay. A very good morning and good afternoon to our dear participants, and you're welcome to this wonderful session, which is part one of the sessions being conducted at the Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa 2021. The forum began on 27th, that's on Monday, with some pre-sessions, and the official we started yesterday. We shall be going on until tomorrow, the 30th September 2021. This particular session is focusing on issues of technology and disability rights. And as you may know, technology ideally is supposed to create a playing level field for everyone, supposed to be an enabler for the enjoyment of fundamental human rights for everybody. But for very many years, issues of persons with disability, the marginalized, the women and minority rights groups have been left behind. And progressively, we have seen that the women movement took it upon themselves and other supporters to ensure that the rights of the women are enshrined and protected in several constitutions and pieces of legislation at both national and international level. And then progressively again, we have been seeing that the debate around the rights for persons with disability has been taking center stage. And with the introduction of the Convention for Rights for Persons with Disability, we saw that there was a very big shift in the respect and demand for the protection and promotion of rights for persons with disability. Over the years, several countries have been able to pass national legislation with and include provisions that protect the rights of persons with disability in their national constitutions, and subsequently enacted the several enabling laws to ensure that the rights for persons with disability are protected and they are enshrined in their respective legislation. And even then, this was followed up by the establishment of different national bodies to ensure that the rights are practiced and to hold people accountable. And in some countries, such as Uganda, we have seen that the status of persons with disability was elevated to ensure, to the extent that there was an appointment of a minister of state. In other countries, it is just still a department, but in Uganda now we have a minister of state for disability affairs. This shows the weight with which very many countries are now trying to hold the rights for persons with disability on the continent very high. In this session, we want to discuss that. We want to learn from different countries, different experiences. What are the biggest challenges for persons with disability in accessing digital rights, but also what are the gaps? And then how do we ensure that these challenges are met and that persons with disability are able to meaningfully enjoy their rights, but also participate meaningfully in the lives and decision making of their different countries. On this panel, we have Mr. Colorado Castiano from Mozambique. We have Mr. Robert Nkwangu, who is the Executive Director of the National Association of the Deaf. We have Honorable Helen Grace. She's the Minister of State for Disability Affairs in Uganda. We are expecting Mr. Ute Kwaku, who's the Executive Director of Action for Human Rights. As we wait for him, I would like to ask our panelists to briefly say a word or two about themselves and what they do. I'll start with the Colorado.
Thank you, Paul. Again, I'm very honored to be in this panel. I think it's my second time taking part in the FIFA Africa conference, and it has been great since the first time. So I am Clodoaldo, as Paul said, and I'm based in Maputo, Mozambique. In Maputo, I work for the forum of disabled persons organizations in Mozambique, the umbrella organizations of persons with disabilities. I also work with the National Human Rights Commission in Mozambique as a disability expert, but also supporting other areas of human rights. So my background is mainly in disability rights and human rights. I have a very, very great interest in ICT accessibility for persons with disabilities, as I believe that this is one of the key areas for us to ensure that persons with disabilities will have equal access to their human rights as other people. So thank you very much for inviting me to this session. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Colorado. I will move on to Honorable Sam. Just a few words about yourself and your work. Honorable, you are muted.
Thank you so much, moderator. I want to first of all to greet all the panelists. I want to welcome especially Colorado from Maputo to Uganda, because I think Ugandans are cheating. They are more in the panel than the others. But I want to say that my name is Asamo Helen Grace. Currently, I'm the Minister of State for Disability in the Ministry of Gender, Labor, and Social Development. I am an activist in the disability movement, and I've participated in many processes of the disability movement, including the development of the UN CRPD, that's the Convention on the Rights of Disabilities in New York, the Act of People with Disabilities, and also in the mobilization and ensuring that we sensitize the disabled people upon their rights. So briefly, that is Asamo Helen Grace.
Thank you, Honorable, for the brief introduction. We'll move on to Robert.
Yes, hello everyone. Good morning. I use sign language. I'm happy to be part of this panel. My name is Robert Nkwangu. I'm the Executive Director of the Ghana National Association of the Deaf, just like the moderator introduced me. But I'm also a disability inclusion specialist, both locally and internationally, and largely focusing on seeing that different programs, social programs, community programs are all inclusive of issues and of persons with disabilities. That is my very big passion, and briefly, that is Robert Nkwangu. With me is Bukenya Wycliffe, my sign language interpreter, with whom I'm borrowing his voice because I use sign language. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. And now we dive into our discussion. We'll start with you, Colorado. Honorable Asamo in her remarks talked about the CRPD, which she ably participated into the drafting and making submissions. I know that in the last few months, you conducted a study about the Mozambique's status on how they have implemented the provisions in the CRPD, specifically on the accessibility for persons with disability. Maybe you could share some of the findings, what you discovered, how Mozambique is faring, what were the challenges, and how we can try to move forward, and maybe what other countries can learn from your experience and the findings of your study.
Thank you, Paul. That's very true. We have been conducting a research on the situation of the legal and policy framework of ICT accessibility in Mozambique. And that was possible with a great support from CIPESA, and support not only financially, but also technically, because CIPESA developed a very specific tools to the African context to measure how African countries have been doing in their own context with their own limitations in terms of addressing the ICT accessibility obligations that have been enshrined in the CRPD and now in the African Disability Protocol. So this has been a great experience for us. In summary, this is what we have been able to find. we covered 5 of the key 6 areas of ICT accessibility. We covered the legal and policy framework as such of ICT accessibility. So what type of laws and policies our government has put in place. So when we analyzed these, we concluded that unfortunately in Mozambique, we haven't set a specific agenda on ICT accessibility, legal and policy framework. So although we have ratified the CRPD, our government has not been able to define a specific agenda, policy or legal agenda to address the obligations in the CRPD. So that's the first conclusion. Second, we have also realized that ICT accessibility remains largely unregulated in our country. So when we speak about areas like public procurement, access to video and live video and broadcasting, emergency communication, all those areas haven't been regulated in terms of ICT accessibility. So there's a wide gap in terms of regulations on ICT accessibility. In some form, we also covered the public access area, which basically means the services that the government has been providing to facilitate access to internet and technology to the public. So, and there we also realized that the needs, accessibility needs of persons with disabilities haven't been met. The service providers, even those who have been benefiting from funds from the government, they haven't been considering persons with disabilities. And they don't even include the number of persons with disabilities that have been beneficiaries of their projects, although they're also using government fundings. We have a universal access fund in Mozambique, which is managed by the telecommunications agency in Mozambique. But this fund, although it mentions disability, it doesn't have specific disability-related programs, and it doesn't measure even how accessible the programs that are funded by this Universal Access Fund, how accessible those programs are. We also covered the television and video, live video communication. And I think in this area, the key conclusion we obtained is that unfortunately our government hasn't been supporting the television service providers to provide accessible services. So they have been struggling with the issue, for instance, of hiring sign language interpreters. So this is one of the key things which they've been arguing, that they haven't been able to provide a large percentage of sign language interpreted programs. Quickly, I will also mention what we managed to achieve, our findings in terms of emergency services. And here also, the first thing we realized is that we don't have a regulation in this, but also our telecommunication services providers, they also don't have accessible services for persons with disabilities. And this is not in their agenda as well. So we cannot talk about, for instance, relay services in Mozambique, because this is not in the agenda of our telecommunication agencies. And we also realized that it's very difficult for persons with disabilities to access their services. One major issue that we found in our research, and it's actually the cover, we took a picture and this is the cover of our report, is the lack of physical accessibility to the headquarters of the major telecommunication companies. So we find persons with disabilities who are, we actually pictured persons with disabilities who were sitting outside and they were getting services outside of these buildings. So I think I will stop here, just not to take long, but this is somehow what we got from this research. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Claude. And I think your findings just confirm what we also discovered in the previous studies that we did using the same tool that we developed. And moving on to Honorable Assam, before COVID-19 struck, Uganda was really looked at as a model country in as far as promoting and respecting rights for personal stability was concerned. We, of course, had the ratified the CRPD. We have different laws that call for the promotion and respect for personal stability, including requiring that media houses, at least in their main programming, provide for sign language interpretation. And of course, the UCC is also mandated to do research and innovate to ensure that the rights of personal stability are really promoted and protected. But when COVID struck and then most of the services moved online, we realized that we are not any different from many other countries. As in your docket as a political leader, what is it that we need to do besides passing the legislation and how do we move forward? We have the laws, but now with the advent of COVID, it has exposed us actually there are a lot of gaps in the implementation of these laws and holding the duty bearers accountable.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I want first of all to thank Correda for his talk about what happens in Maputo. And I want to share a bit about Uganda, and I want to agree with you that at least we have a lot of laws in place. And I think that is a credit to the government of Uganda. But I want to agree with you that with the coming of COVID-19, which was a global issue, many countries were not ready. It means that the planning process had to get back to a drawing board. But allow me go through the process and say that technology, ICT, and digitalization for empowerment to include people with disabilities is already enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And Uganda as a country, already we have the UCC Act, and at least we have a member on the board of UCC who is supposed to be able to advocate for information access and internet challenges within the confines of UCC, which is in charge of communication activities in Uganda. I also want to say that it is true with the COVID-19, many activities moved online and, accessing information, publishing, and the issues like a lot of businesses were conducted online. These affected many people, like people with disabilities. And majority of them were sort of cut off. Even the messages about COVID-19 itself was a challenge because whereas they telecast the main programs in Uganda on TV, we do not do it for all other programs. So when the Minister of Health was providing information, most of our people were missing. At the media center, we tried to bring an interpreter, but I think it was also not accessible enough to the TV. You only see the fingers moving, but then you don't get the person who's giving the information. But I want to think that having no access to technology is a liability to people with disabilities. And in Uganda, where we have 16% of the population having people with disabilities, it's critical that we have some of these things brought on board. But allow me to recognize that there are some efforts by government to ensure that people with disabilities benefit. For example, we are already beginning to look at issues like brailing materials, especially the important documents, like the Act for People with Disabilities, specific for disability, has already been brailed by my ministry, and this will be given to people with visual impairment. We are now struggling to get to Ministry of Public Service to ensure that we have, at least in all the MDAs, some sign language interpreters who are recruited in a pool so that they can be able to give communication. I also know that the issues of communication, ICT are very expensive. At least we have a few disabled people in Uganda who are able to have people you click and then they just come on board. We have some of the people who have that kind of information. I also want to say that some of our people are able to be able to attend to Zoom like we're attending now. And I've just held a meeting with the steering committee, and almost all of them were participating. But I want to say that when the COVID-19 came, especially in the education, where we went online, many of the young people with disabilities who are in the learning age bracket missed out because they were not ready. They couldn't afford the internet. You remember there was that OTT task, which was put in, and disability and poverty are sort of intertwined. So their parents were unable to afford to give them this kind of facility. And right now we are in negotiation with the Ministry of Education. How do we get the children with special needs to access education if we have to go online? How are they going to perform? Because there was evidence, I think in the deaf school in the primary level, almost all the children failed because online education was not put into an accessible format for them to get the information. I also want to think that the high cost of the materials, for example, even a mere phone, getting a smartphone is a very expensive thing. And maybe at a certain point, we need to discuss what other method can we use to ensure that people can be able to get access to information. But Uganda is trying its level best, and everything has to move progressively. And I want to say that I think government is positive on how to include people with disabilities into the digital world, now that we're all moving towards that level. So my prayer is that working together with the disabled people's organizations, we shall be able to come up with strategies and mechanisms of ensuring that technology is improved, technology is accessible, and technology is affordable to people with disabilities in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. And yes, so you mentioned the number of interventions that you've been able, you're trying to do, especially given the COVID situation. We've also had interactions with the members of the sign language interpreter. Initially, we were under the impression that these are very few in number. That's why probably many media houses, radio, TV stations, for example, are not trying to use their services. But we were informed, I think, a few days ago that there are very many persons who can do sign language interpretation. The question has been, why have, as DPOs or ministry, your ministry, worked with these people to ensure that at least the main programs on television, because I think they have limited, for TV stations, they have limited the service of sign language interpretation to only the main bulletin. So any other programs, the person with disability miss out. If I can ask, have you tried to work with this association and also working with the media houses to ensure that they provide more slots for sign language interpretation?
Okay, thank you, Paul, for that question. I want to say that, you know, sensitizing people is a process. And sometimes people, when they don't need that service, they don't understand why is it important to have sign language interpreters. And I want to inform you that sign language interpreters are qualified people, they are professional people. And this is a job that they get through, like Chambogo University, which is a university of government, because that's a public university. And in that university, I think we have about 700 sign language interpreters out there who need to be placed. But before, people thought these are only for people who are deaf. And people did not know that I needed to get information from a deaf person. For example, if I'm a minister and a deaf person walked to my office, then I think we shall have no communication. I will not be able to talk to this deaf person because I lack that facility of a sign language interpreter. And I think during this week's celebration is one area that we are promoting. We are now beginning to negotiate with public service so that we create a place of hiring these people with sign language as professionals so that they can be put in a pool and people can use them. For example, if there's going to be, the president is going to talk, can we get one person to be able to go and translate the message of the president? We have a program going in on COVID-19, somebody should present it. Somebody's talking about reproductive health, somebody should translate also to this deaf community. Because sign language is recognized in the Constitution of Uganda. It's not that it is something that is not a right. It's already in the Constitution of Uganda, recognized as one of the official languages. So we just need to continue engaging, and I'm happy that the Uganda Communication Commission is interested in getting to know how we can work together. For example, when they gave out laptops to schools, they were able to give the schools for the blind laptops with JAWS. And for me, I think this is critical. And we shall continue with the war. Now that I'm in the docket, who knows about where the zone the pricks? I think we shall continue moving ahead and ensure that we have more of this kind of facilities put in place to benefit people with disabilities, especially those with hearing impairment and those with visual impairment. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Honorable. We've been joined by Haute. Haute, you're welcome. I don't know if you've been following the discussions, but before I come to you, let me move to Robert. In one of her remarks, the minister said they are looking forward to working with the DPOs to ensure that whatever work they are doing, that the minister is doing and the DPOs are doing, all work towards ensuring that the rights of persons with disability are protected and promoted. I think in your experience working with the persons who are deaf, what do you think are the main challenges, and maybe what opportunities do exist that you can leverage on to ensure that one, legally, I think the rights are preserved, also practically that these things are also, that these rights are also protected? Robert?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. Once again, like I should say that digital the digital life has presented different barriers. Our brothers who are blind, it's true they can listen, but the biggest barrier which presents that, and of course us who are the people, is the attitude. Just like our Honorable Minister has just said, we have the laws in the land, we have the policies in place, but when it comes to implementation in the different departments, different agencies, there stands a very big challenge. It's the issue about awareness, but also if it's not awareness per se, then the problem is with the attitude. Because if you see the different media centers, different media houses, they are aware what needs to be done to make sure that people with hearing impairment can access information. But the challenge is with attitude, because when the law is clear and one is supposed to be on TV, but then the issue of implementation becomes the problem, because in my opinion, like you said, it's not awareness, because we as DPOs, we have really done our best. We have sensitized the public. We have pushed the government to have these laws, just like the minister said. But then the question is with service providers who are putting aside these provisions and legislation from the government. Take an example of the TVs. Some of them don't have interpreters as we speak right now. When deaf people made noise previously, when they began putting sign language interpreters, but also the guidelines to regulate these media houses, because when you have an inset interpreter on a smaller, in a very small box, it also becomes a challenge for us because we cannot see. Remember, sign language is a visual language, so we cannot see the sign language interpreter on TV at times. If you have these regulations, it could be very helpful. Just like our minister said that COVID has really presented a very big change and has opened up different gaps, because accessibility to information has been a very big challenge. Our minister has talked about also the learning materials. Many times, our members come to our DPOs, some other organizations, the UNAD, the UNAB, and all that. Take an example. As UNAD, we've been trying to change this information into sign language for COVID for the people to understand. It has been an initiative which has been done by UNAD as a DPO, but then also learning materials. we need to learn to change them in a format which is accessible by our deaf people. You know, the digital content for our students in education settings quite very important for them to learn, because you must remember that we are NGOs, which NGOs depend on donations. So we cannot do everything by ourselves because donors come with a budget and with a timeline. And then the other opportunities that we have is working with government, because government itself needs to know how DPOs and different organizations can be supportive to make sure that we can access resources and make some adaptations to have universal designs in terms of technology for the benefit of our people with disabilities. So a part of at times, the issue of cost comes into play because these softwares could be very expensive, and of course shipping it, and also both the software and hardware, bringing it from abroad to Uganda may be very expensive. The devices and materials that will be used are quite expensive as well. So this is some opportunity we need to engage with the government. I think to ask them to waive off these hardwares and softwares that we are to use to change this information in a format that is accessible by our members with disabilities. The Department of ICT, we have a policy, and we participated, of course, in the design of this policy, but it has taken long to be approved. It also represents a challenge that is amidst us, because we had very good points and recommendations that we submitted for the accessibility of information, especially for us, the deaf people. Because we really need this policy to be approved as soon as yesterday, because we need this implementation in place. Previously, government has accepted the Marrakesh Treaty, which will be hopeful to change these materials into formats that will be accessible, because they had issues to do with the copyrights, and right now the people could be also benefiting from the same. We will try to make some adaptation to use technology to change different materials, but the copyrights at times restricts us in changing these materials into accessible formats. Therefore, different groups need to be sensitized, different agencies. We believe that the policy itself has to have inputs of persons with disabilities, and then we have some inputs, and then we can move forward. And finally, Paul, the issue of the captioning. It should interest you that most of the service providers have closed down with the captioning. They've closed down with the captioning or with the different wordings and all that. So it is missing in all this information. Yet captioning is something that needs to be put in place, because we need these live captions when anything is happening, when any event is happening. And in my summary is that the issue is all about attitude. I should go back where I started from. Once we have a positive attitude from the service providers, then we shall have the benefit in each and everything that we are endeavoring to do, because we've done the level-based in terms of sensitizing, but the aspect of attitude is still a very big gap for me, because most of these entities are profit-oriented. When you look at deaf persons, they may look at us as a minority group, and then they may not be interested in putting us on board. Yet, we have a very big number of people who are like us, and then who are also other candidates who become like us. So the aspect of attitude will be quite very expensive, will be quite very important. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you, Robert. And you talk about issues of attitude. The minister and Mr. Colorado also talked about issues of cost. Just want to find out, because having the laws in place, or especially for most countries, but the biggest problem has been the implementation or lack of it. And then you are talking about the aspect of the attitude. For many people who are profit-oriented, they do not look at the constituents of persons with disability as a viable market. I think before we end this session, we shall have some discussions on how best to ensure that we engage with these entities, to ensure that as opposed to looking at these at our colleagues as just a constituent or a market segment, to look at them as human beings who have every right to enjoy the fundamental rights, especially access to issues of ICT. But if I may ask, Colorado, back to you, people talk about costs of producing the accessibility materials, especially maybe the constitution, the reading materials, and also government is always talking about that the cost is so high. Have you, in your experience, I know you also sit on the council in Maputo, try to work with the government to cost the implication of implementing some of these laws, so that you start from there? Because when somebody says the cost is very high, how high if they haven't put a figure? Because it is always easier to say how high, okay, how much can you give me for now, so that progressively we begin the implementation. Have you engaged in these discussions?
Well, thank you, Paul. Well, we actually we have in very instances we have put that question that we really need to ascertain whether the costs are so high. That's one of the examples we have been, and we have also been trying to lead by example, when making sure that each and every of our communications, our events, including meetings with the government officers, are inclusive of sign language interpreters. Just to show them that a small organization like ours, with a very small budget, can afford to make their services, their events accessible. And this message is strong because it tells us two things. First, that whatever costs we are talking about, they become very, very, very less when we consider accessibility at the very outset of the establishment of any services. And the second thing is that accessibility shouldn't be considered an add-on service, because sometimes we think at accessibility as an extra thing, and services providers, media centers, they also get this perception, and our policies sometimes lead us to this perception that the accessibility, either in media, either for telecommunication services, accessibility comes as an add-on services. So if we can change this perception and make sure that our policies, but also the conversation we hold with these actors, make them understand that it's not an extra thing. It's something that should be embedded in their structures, should be embedded in their operational costs, and not come as an extra thing. So if we can change this discourse, then I think this conversation of costs will also be driven down. But I'm not. I'm aware that in some areas, in some specific areas, the costs might go a little bit beyond the capacity of the service providers. We are also all aware of that. So I think that's where government should come and support. That's where government should play a very key role supporting these actors. But I think, but in summary, I think this is the key ideas here would be first to consider accessibility at the outset. If a company is trying to get the license to broadcast, then they should be able to provide an evidence that they're going to have accessible services. And then accessibility should not be considered as an extra. No, I think that should be part of the mainstream costs, the mainstream services that the companies should be providing. And whenever we see that we are asking far beyond what these actors can do, then I think that the government should take responsibility of it, because we are talking about human rights and we cannot afford to build societies which cannot respect human rights. So that's my take on this, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul Dado. I see a hand amongst our participants, Mashlongo. Well, I think she has disappeared. Maybe if I can come to you, Honorable Minister, how funded is our, no, Minister, I think you wait. We go to Phillips. Phillips, I see your hand is up. Okay, Phillips is not talking. So, Madam Minister, we have the...
Philip, could you please type your question, please, if you don't mind? If you can't speak, please, can you please type? Yes.
Okay, so if we shall get Philip's question in the chat, then we fire it to the panelists. So, Madam Minister, how heavy is our Universal Access Fund, and how are we using the funds to provide services to persons with disability?
Okay, thank you so much. I don't think I have a fund for accessibility or whatever, but the way we are treating disability in Uganda is about using it as a cross-cutting issue, so that all the ministries, all the departments and agencies are able to include issues of disability. Right now, what the ministry is doing, we have already developed the regulations, which are going to ensure that the Act of Persons with Disabilities is implementable. So these regulations, by next week or the other week, will be going to the top management, and then thereafter comes to the top policy. Once we have concluded and cabinet passes this, the regulations will enable us to look at access, because there is an area of reasonable accommodation that we borrowed from the convention. Reasonable accommodation means that anybody employing, or if I'm in a school or I'm in a hospital, should be able to make sure that I get benefit of accessibility to anything that happen in that environment. So for example, if I'm employed and I'm blind, you should be able to give me a computer which has got access to JAWS so that I can be able to do my work. So as a ministry, we are taking disability as a cross-cutting issue. And I don't believe that disability is dignified for a certain group of people. Disability is a progressive idea. Anybody today who is not disabled can become disabled. And I think as we plan in a way that we make sure that these things are put in place. You talked about the affordability of these things. It also depends on what I bring into an institution or company. For example, if I'm employed and you bought for me, let's use an example of a lift, because I cannot climb steps. That lift is not only used by disabled people, it ends up being used by everybody. it becomes more comfortable to everybody. So I think as a ministry, we want to promote the issue of a barrier-free environment that can allow people access information, allow people to be employed, allow people to be comfortable in the areas that they will be working. So for me, as a ministry, I am taking it upon myself that I get to all the other ministries. I've already got appointment with the Minister of Education to discuss issues of special needs education, how our people are going to access as they move to online. So I think these are the critical issues. I am discussing with the Minister of Public Service as we move to the parish development model. How are disabled people going to benefit this information, and how does the information reach them that this is how they will benefit? So it is really a cross-cutting concept, and it is something that we need to look at. So there's no money that has been put like in my ministry to ensure that we get this. So if I talk about communication on TV, then I have to get to where the TV is from and ensure that the guidelines are changed. And already Robert has said most of the disabled people participated in some of these guidelines. Sometimes it takes long, but I think we need to follow them up and ensure that they come out. There's already a policy in the Ministry of Education which is not coming out. Is one of the agendas that I want to follow up. We have the policy on ICT. We have a policy, the guidelines on accessibility to buildings and parking places. So I think in Uganda, we are struggling to share the little which is there. And I want to believe that as we progress within this period, where we are talking of leaving no one behind and trying to achieve the SDG goals, that something will be done and people with disabilities will move to a certain percentage in terms of inclusion.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Thank you, Honorable Minister. I think now that we have a portfolio, I think the next item on the agenda would be to ensure that the portfolio is well funded. I think, Robert, you have a very big role to play as the minister may not be able to push certain things, but if there is a lot of pressure from civil society, DPOs, I think it works. There would be a win-win situation. Nashilongo,
I think before you go there, Paul,
yes.
My way of work, I believe that I'm going to work with the DPOs,
yes,
we are going to be having our meetings. Already I've started with the members of parliament on a monthly basis, if there are issues that we want to bring on board, so that as a minister, if I cannot push it, then the members of parliament have to bring it from the other angle. So I'm also going to get the DPOs on place so that I understand each DPO, what exactly are their challenges, so that when you come and package it up, you know how to approach those other challenges that each DPO has, because they all have unique challenges, and that's the reason why they exist. And I think if we work together as a partnership, we can drive this agenda to something. And I would pray that we cooperate with the government to see how we can work together.
Thank you very much. Are you now able to participate?
Hello?
Yes, are you able to participate now?
Yeah, I'm able. But
okay. Thank you. I know your English is not so good, but I'm going to request you to speak English because we couldn't get an interpreter for you. So you followed the discussion. There are two questions that I want to ask you from the participants. Number one, Phillips is asking that in light of access for the marginalized groups, how do we identify disability-specific issues and propose some disability-specific interventions to enhance access to digital and remote learning systems for learners with disability? Then number two is asking, do you have any key actions and recommendations that we can employ to ensure the inclusivity of remote and online education systems? If you could start with that, then also share some of the experience from the work that you're doing for the rights of persons with disability.
Okay. I will be very comfortable if it was in French, but I will try in English because the official language is French here. So I will try with the second question first, and then I'll move to the first question. I don't know if the order
the order does not
right
matter.
For you. Okay, so as all the participants or the speakers say, disability and the digital are the main issues that we address here in our country, Cote d'Ivoire. And there are many barriers that prevent people with disabilities to have access to internet, to ICT. And I think to allow people with disabilities to have, as we say, access to online training opportunities, I think the government and the Ministry of Education and higher education in different countries must invest many resources in terms of device, in terms of scholarship, in terms of internet routers to allow people with disabilities, like those who have hearing impairment and visual impairment, to have access to the online opportunities like courses, like also other opportunities like internship, so that if they proceed like that, they will make people with disabilities more comfortable, and they will deal with the issue of inclusion in our societies, because access to internet here is not easy, and people with visual impairment and hearing impairment sometimes are excluded from some opportunities that internet offers. So I think that government must invest the efforts by providing accessible tools to people with disabilities, like the prize for people with visual impairments. And apart from the government, I think that also the organization on the ground, NGOs and civil society organization must also have the means to make internet accessible to people with disabilities, because at the top level, there are the governments that takes policies to make internet accessible, but practically it is the responsibility of NGOs to make internet more accessible to people with disabilities. So people with organization as well as government should collaborate in order to make internet more accessible, because if the government takes policies, it is at the political level. So most of the times they take policies, but on the ground, you will notice that it is not the reality on the party. So I think that government will do the work, and also the organization will also do their work on the ground. But for the organization, I want that many partners or funders must support them, because they have limited access to financial resources to do the great work on the ground. So for the second question, I'm sorry, so because my English is not very fluent, but for the second question, these are the contributions that I want to to add.
Yes, thank you very much, Aute. You underestimate your English. It is quite perfect. You need to practice a bit more, and I will ensure that by the time you end this session, will be perfect. I will ask you many more questions.
Okay.
To the panelists, Colorado and Robert, there is a question here from Brenda asking people with living disability informed of their rights to have access to facilities that enable them to ensure they are part of sustainable development. Because awareness is a very big component in trying to promote accountability. So in your assessment, do you think many more people living with disability are aware of their rights, not just human rights, but especially digital rights? I can start with you, Robert.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Brenda, for the question. Generally, the issue of education of people with disabilities is low. I should start from there. A majority of us have not gone to school, which means it presents a very big challenge in us knowing our human rights, because many don't know the human rights, and that is a very big challenge. So similarly, digital rights and accessibility to them presents itself as a challenge because majority of our people do not know, right? The reason why I'm saying this is that the information that goes out there, first of all, is not accessible. The education itself is not accessible by the majority of us. And secondly, the DPOs. Take an example, UNID. We have tried to teach, we have tried to sensitize our deaf people about the human rights, but then our reach is limited because, like I said initially, we cannot serve all the entire country because we depend on donations given the fact that we're an NGO. Currently, the skills that people with the disabilities use with the ICT are also limited. Therefore, we as DPOs, we need to do more teaching, building the capacity of our members in our respective organizations, given our disabilities, such that we give them a firm ground for them to begin demanding for what is theirs. That would be very, very important. I believe so. That would be very, very important. And that's something I can put for Brenda right now.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Okay. Robert, still have the floor.
Yes, I thought I was done, but yes. Thank you. Brenda's question was in line with that one our Honorable Minister has been talking about, because we have been trying to traverse this world, and different governments have been supporting DPOs, been having some budget and some resources that have been allocated. But we don't know whether that can be done, replicated in Uganda here, because in my knowledge, the deaf people, for example, they have some innovations, which can work best, especially in the aspect in the education. Those innovations could be very well, if at all, they could be funded and adopted. If government can come in and support these innovations from the mother organizations, having different models that can, well, we can use them as a pilot to see whether they can work, because we needed a bottom-up approach, because other than having something top-down. So that can help and also ensure sustainability of us moving forward in advancing our rights, especially with the digital migration. I think that will work best, I believe, because personally I feel that it is high time that we need to increase the domestic funding for digital innovations for people with disabilities. That will be the base of moving forward, because once it begins from us, we shall ensure sustainability. Thank you very much.
Nancy has not switched off the video.
Thank you, Robert. I have to move you to Colorado. One of the participants, Nashwan, was asking that we have these so many and very powerful platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and others that control our social media life. Have we in any way, maybe from your experience, tried to engage them to ensure that their platforms and the services are accessible for persons with disability? And do you think, maybe if you're not, do you think we should do engage them?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Robert, for also making this very good explanation. And I think somehow these two questions are related, because it's very true that among persons with disabilities, there is very low level of awareness of digital rights. And I'm glad, of course, with this support from CIPESA, at least in Mozambique, we were able to initiate discussions amongst the disability rights movement about digital rights. So, and we hope that this will also bring some change in the communities for people, for persons with disabilities and their family, to understand that this is a key element for persons with disabilities to participate in society and to be able to cope with the development of society. So, and now going to this specific question about this mega platform, social media platforms. Well, I think we have to be, I think we have to acknowledge the work that some of these big platforms, Facebook, Google, some of these platforms have really been in the edge of ICT accessibility. They promote accessibility into their platforms, into their services, but they also support ICT accessibility initiatives. So we have to, in fairness, some of these platforms have been doing a very important work. So it's possible to do more. Yes, it is possible, and some of this responsibility also lays on the OPDs. I think they should definitely start taking a stronger role driving this ICT accessibility agenda, having direct, strict discussions with these platforms. Of course, they have a very strong potential of promoting access, because they're really widespread. So they have a very strong potential to promote participation of persons with disabilities in mainstream society and access to ICT. So I think this is a responsibility of the OPDs themselves to reach out to these big actors and make sure that the impact of their work is spread and reach more people with disabilities. So this is my opinion on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Colorado. Now, Honorable Minister, if I may come to, I think we would have had a chance to engage with Facebook, but now they are suspended. But yes, there are other big platforms still that operate in the country, and we still feel that they have a big role to play in ensuring that their services are accessible to persons with disability. Do you envisage having an engagement with them together with the Minister of ICT?
Yeah, as I already informed you that we are taking disability as a cross-cutting issue. And I already informed you that we have a representative sitting in the UCC board, and they have just been inaugurated. I think using our representative on the UCC board, we shall be able to communicate with the Ministry of ICT. Personal as a minister to minister level, I'm also going to write and ask for a meeting where I take my delegation of the DPOs, like the deaf people, the blind people, so that they can understand from the horse's mouth what challenges they can, how can they be able to improve on accessibility to information, accessibility to things like internet. Sometimes we add taxes without understanding that there are people who get affected with some of these things of those kind of taxes. For example, when the OTT came in, then you are going to block out most of the deaf people who use that method of communication. And now when we increased, I think, the internet to, was it 12% or something? I don't know. But you know, it affected again a certain group of people, because when this band is removed, it affects this person's accessibility onto the internet bundle. So I think for me as a minister and the DPOs, I can't work alone. I want to work with them and ensure that we can be able to improve and be able to access this, because as Uganda is developing itself and trying to achieve the SDGs by 2030, and you leave the disabled people behind, then you would have not moved to that level. So for me, my thinking is that all the programming that government is talking about, and the good thing under the NDP3, they're talking of inclusion. So that is the benchmark that I'm using and saying, how inclusive are you? So you have to look at it and say the beginning point is the information gap, because once I don't have information about a certain program, about a certain activity, then it means that you're going to leave me behind, and that does not achieve the SDGs. So my thinking as a minister is for us to have meaningful inclusion, then we need to provide for appropriate, affordable, and accessible technologies that can enable people with disabilities participate in all the programming and ensure that they are included. And maybe we shall achieve these SDGs together as a country. And you know, our technologies include right from, let me say, a weighing machine, if we are talking about a cookery house. Is that weighing machine being able to talk to a blind person so that I can make the best measurements if I'm going to make a cake and that kind of thing. So it's going to be all inclusive. And I hope together with you people who have started this game that we can come up with a paper and be able to engage all the other partners and ensure that people with disabilities are not left out. Now that we're in the technology world, now that most businesses are run online, we need to bring this unprivileged group of people on board. And I hope government of Uganda will be a partner, and I know they will. And I think when you look at our Act Article 15, where we say access to justice, information, and training, is very critical, and my prayer is that our regulations come out and then we can know how we can break these different responsibilities to each of the government service providers to be able to include our people, because that's already provided in the Act and also going to come out in the regulations. So for me, I am very confident that we shall move, even if it's one step. They say journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. We shall be moving to the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable, for my wonderful participants. I am requesting that if you have any question or comment, kindly use the chat option to share. I want to come to Robert. The minister is here. What is your ask? What do you want the minister to do for you?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Well, the first thing is that I want to thank the president because he appointed an experienced person and a lived person, a life-lived person. Before I would have showed myself, and I would have introduced myself as a disability activist. But when I had Mama Honorable, my senior Honorable, someone introducing herself as an activist, I turned down that title of activism because she's more experienced than I am. My humble request to the Honorable Minister is that the issues of innovations by persons with disabilities themselves. The deaf, the blind man. Once we have these innovations starting from us, it will ensure sustainability. If possible, government will fund these innovations from our mother organizations and have them as models. Then after government can take on them to roll out for sustainability, I think that would be very, very important because it's my humble request. When you look at these textbooks that government is issuing out for academic purposes, we have a group that try to teach to change these books, these publications into digital technology, putting these textbooks into sign language, some audio. I mean, this will be very helpful because our children with the different categories of disabilities will be able to learn and have the base of the education once they have these materials in an accessible format. And also, Honorable Minister, just like we said that these taxes on the internet for people with a disability is quite dear. It's quite expensive for us. We need a waiver from this because just like we said, the OTT and now the internet is 12%. I mean, communication becomes difficult because, take an example, us who are deaf, we usually use sign language for communication. We usually make video calls every now and again. So once 1 minute, a bundle of 1,000 is gone because that's why I had to come to CPESA to use the internet because paying my internet with my phone and also my interpreter will be very expensive. So I requested CPESA, I mean, to use their services, their premises to come. So Honorable Minister, that's how I've struggled to travel from whenever I've been to access this this meeting. However, I want to thank CPESA for this important engagement and the platform. It has created a very good ground and for us to have fruits in the near future. So if possible, support and fund the research once again to see that these innovations come up from these DPOs, of course, with evidence-based that they can have fruits in the near future. And finally, Honorable Minister, the Ict policy in response to the disabilities, I believe the draft is out. It's quite important that let this be approved with the top management, and then because it talks about different issues on persons with disabilities. And the Marrakesh Treaty also needs to be urgently assented to, because we as DPOs, we need to change these materials in a format that is accessible to our people, but we are afraid of the copyright law. So if these impediments could be put out of place, I think we can do. And Honorable Minister, I trust and you that UNAD is willingly and ready to work with your ministry and ready to work together to address these challenges amidst us in the disability movement, especially for us people with hearing impairment. And we shall use, because we are the users of different aspects, we are ready to give the technical support and advice on see how we can move best. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert. Before the minister responds, because those were so many requests, I hope she's strong enough to push through the agenda. I want to come to you, Colorado. The minister is here. She's not minister in Mozambique, but in her interactions with her senior colleagues from different countries, she can push in a word or two. What would you ask of her, especially at the international level, and maybe if there are things you are failing to push through in Mozambique? What would you? Don't be like Robert. You can ask about the aspects.
I think for me, I'm already thinking of inviting Honorable Minister to a meeting here in Mozambique, because I think it can be very, very useful for our government, because they they don't have this experience and this willing to communicate with the disabled persons organization. So I think that would be great. So if you happen to meet my ministers, and if there's any visit, if I know about any visit, any exchange between Uganda and Mozambique, I will definitely reach out, because I think the first thing you should ask, or just talk to, is to ask how far have they gone in terms of ensuring that they have a plan, they have a policy, they have an agenda to make sure that persons with disabilities living in Mozambique can access ICTs. So what is in their minds? I think that would be the first question, and then you can share with them the policies you have been working on, the new policy you are trying to put in place, and maybe you can share with your experience how it has been benefiting developments in ICT accessibility, and also share your experience in Uganda, that even after setting this ICT accessibility framework, all that, they need also to be aware that there is a lot of work to be done after that to make sure that these policies actually deliver in terms of disability rights. So I think this is what I would ask, basically, like ask them what's in their minds. So what are they planning to do? So if you can just influence that, then that will be great. And I'm sure I will definitely reach out to ask if we can invite you to one of our webinars. We are heading to December 3rd week, and ICT accessibility will be in our agenda. So if you can be our guest in one of the meetings, that will be great. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Colorado. And yes, I know the minister will say yes to everything that you've asked. Yes, is that good? Yes, Aute, you've been a bit, okay, he's gone off. So, Madam Minister, as we conclude, I think what would you, as you respond to these requests, what would you be your parting shots, especially to the people in the trenches trying to fight for the rights of persons with disability, also the persons living with disability themselves? I think we can't leave everything to government, as government has its own role. The DPOs have their own role. The persons living with disability also have a role to play, because they are users and they must identify the agenda of what they need the DPOs and the government to do. But also among the participants, we have different stakeholders, the journalists, we need to get telecom companies, but there are different stakeholders. What do you think we should be doing to ensure that the push for the rights of disability, persons with disability is collective and holistic?
Okay, thank you, Paul. And I want to thank the fellow panelists and all those who have asked some questions. That first of all, for any change to occur, it has to start with the individual. There is nobody who's going to think about you if you don't show that you have a need, you have a challenge. And I think the disabled fraternity, whether in Uganda or in Mozambique, must show cause for any change, for any policy change, for any action to be taken place. So I am happy that in Uganda, the disability movement is somehow united, and understanding their challenges helps us to see how we can move forward. And they have reached a stage where they can say, this is not beneficial to us, but you need to come with solutions on how beneficial it is to you. Because sometimes you can talk to implementers, you can talk to the technical people, and they don't know the how. So I think that as a team, we need to begin promoting, and I want to agree with Robert when he says, when we begin making our technologies, our innovations, we should be supported. And we all know that in Uganda, there's an innovation fund. How do we present our concept to the Innovation Ministry of Science and say, this is what we want to do to benefit a certain population of people of Uganda? And there, if we convince this kind of entity, then we're able to get this fund and ensure maybe beneficial, but we go outside and say, as a government, how do they benefit from their innovation? So I think for me, as the minister, that working together with other people, they will come up with the ideas, and then we're able to use those ideas to ensure that they can get on board. I think Colorado talked about telecommunications institutions. How do we get the telecommunication institutions to include us as people with disabilities into their programming, so that we are not seen as people who are looking at something, but people who can benefit something out of that? I think we need to see how we can work at our policy levels, which we already have, but how do we translate this to actions? And I agree with Colorado that we need a big plan. And as a ministry, we're already working on our national policy on disability. Now we want to work on a full budget and then come up with some activities, at least for a period of 5 years, where we can be looking and check ourselves whether we are moving in the right direction. I think as a minister, I want to say that we shall be working together with my team and together with the disability fraternity. My office will be open, bring in ideas, and see how we can make change. Because we all know information is power. We know information is wealth. If you lack information, if you lack technology, then you will be remaining in the old days. So as we move forward to achieve the SDGs 2030, let us come together as a family and be able to show the world that disabled people can. And if you continue calling yourself disabled and being negative, I am promoting positivity in disability. And I think positivity is the word to use, not disability in disability. So it has to be positivity so that people can be able to appreciate and say, oh, these people are really wonderful. I will tell you, Paul, recently when we had the Deaf Week in Arua, and I went with the Right Honorable Third Deputy Prime Minister, she really appreciated the organization, and she was kept on asking me, are all these people deaf? You see, they are communicating. And I told her, Madam, now if we stop the sign language interpreter, then we shall be the ones to be deaf. So I told her, now you are a new advocate in the area, and we need to see whatever they have asked us. And they gave us some of their areas, and we are going to move. I will follow it up with the Prime Minister to see how do we follow what they have asked. One of the things was access to information. How do we make this information accessible in their language? You know, the English of the deaf is different from the normal English. So you need to put these documents into a language that they can understand. He has talked about captions, about their language. So all this has to be put in, and already they have expertise of their dictionary of the deaf. Now the dictionary translated into making government documents more accessible to deaf people who have learned sign language, but they have not learned English, but they have learned sign language. So automatically when you do that, I think that comes to an area. I want to believe it comes with a resource envelope, but we shall start from somewhere and ensure that these things come out. Otherwise, it will be hard for me to be a minister and have no change in the lives of people with disabilities. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this discussion, and I hope we shall carry it on and be able to see how we move. For Colorado, I will always wait for your invitation and be able to see whether I can convince your ministers, because we also started from a small agenda, but now I think we are moving towards the inclusion in Uganda. So I hope we shall be able to participate in that area, but not on the 3rd of December. For 3rd of December, I host the International Day of the Disabled in Uganda. So you will not disorganize me when I'm hosting the disabled people in Uganda. So you'll need to look for a date which is not 3rd of December. Thank you so much. And God bless all those who organized. And thank you for the participation.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. I see your back. You shall ask you for your parting shots. I know you didn't participate in the discussions as you would have wanted because of network problems. Are you able to share some parting shots on how we move this conversation forward?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that the organizers, I think, should get us together and see how can we move from here. How do we continue with this agenda? Maybe after this kind of discussion, is there any actions that we shall be able to carry forward? For example, you have asked questions about meeting the Minister of ICT, which to me, I think I can take up and say, I can write a letter to the ICT minister and try to ask for a meeting. Then I get the disabled people on board and be able to meet them. Follow up on the ICT policy, because it was already an inclusive approach when they were designing it. So we need to follow up on the ICT policy and be able to see that it is put into implementation. And we shall also bring the challenges of people with disabilities accessing information, especially now that we're moving to opening schools on the online education. How will the young people, all learners with disabilities, access if we are going to use radios? The deaf automatically will be left out. If we're going to use internet in universities, most of them cannot afford. So all these are things that are cooking around my head and negotiating. I think with education, I'm meeting them on the 12th of October already to discuss how are the learners with disability going to benefit as far as technology is concerned in the learning environment. And I think for me, the other issue is government should come up with a method of appropriate and affordable technology that can involve our people with disabilities. But working together with you, we shall see how we can move together. But I think that is where we can stand as a parting shots. As a minister, I can be able to talk with my fellow minister and see what is the way forward in inclusion of people with disabilities in the information, communication, and technology area. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. Thank you so much, Colorado. Thank you so much, Robert, and our sign language interpreters. Thank you so much, OT, for the wonderful presentation. This has been a very fruitful discussion, and we commit as special that if Minister, should you need us to accompany or provide any written material on ICT and disability, we are available to accompany the different ministries you are meeting. I know you don't have to ask Robert. He will just come. Thank you so much, and have a lovely lunch, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much, and God bless all of you. And we Maputo, bye.
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 Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.